I collapsed during my final law exam, exhausted from working 3 jobs to support my ungrateful family. When the hospital called them, nobody came. Instead, my brother posted online about finally having peace and quiet. I remained silent until their world crumbled a week later. Then I made the call that finished them off. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The last thing I remember wasn't the exam question in front of me. It wasn't the precedent of Donahue v. Stevenson or the intricate details of contract law that I had spent the last 6 months drilling into my brain until my synapses felt like they were misfiring. The last thing I remembered was the vibration of my phone in my pocket. It was a phantom buzz, technically. Phones were strictly prohibited in the exam hall. Mine was locked in a locker 3 floors down, buried under my winter coat. But the sensation was so ingrained in my thigh, so Pavlovian in its demand for my attention, that I could feel it ghosting against my skin even when the device wasn't there. Zoe, the internet bill is due. Zoe, Andrew needs money for gas. Zoe, Mason forgot his password again. Zoe, Olivia wants to know if she can borrow your blazer for a party. The voices in my head were louder than the scratch of pens on paper around me. I blinked, trying to clear the sudden fog that had descended over my vision. The words on the exam paper, black ink on white A4, started to swim. They detached themselves from the page, floating up like oil in water. My heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs, a bird trapped in a cage too small. Just 2 more hours, I told myself, gripping my pen so hard my knuckles turned the color of old parchment. Just finish this section. Then you can work the double shift at the diner. Then you can do the paralegal filing. Then you can go home and fix whatever disaster Sandra has created. I took a breath, but the air didn't seem to reach my lungs. It felt thin, metallic. My vision tunneled. The edges of the room, the rows of hunched students, the prowling invigilators, dissolved into a static gray fuzz. A high-pitched whine, like a mosquito flying directly into my ear canal, drowned out the scratching pens. I need to pay the mortgage, my brain fired off, a random, panic synapse. If I don't pay it by Friday, Mason will lose his mind. I tried to stand up. I wanted to raise my hand, to ask for water, to signal that something was wrong. I pushed my chair back. The screech of the metal legs against the gymnasium floor sounded like a gunshot. Heads turned. I saw a sea of blurred faces looking at me. I opened my mouth to say, "I'm sorry," but no sound came out. The floor rushed up to meet me with violent speed. I didn't even put my hands out to break the fall. I just crumpled, a marionette whose strings had been suddenly, mercilessly cut. The darkness that swallowed me wasn't scary. It was welcoming. It was the first time in 5 years I had been allowed to stop. When I woke up, the world was white and smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. The beep 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 of a monitor was a steady, rhythmic annoyance on my left. I tried to move my arm, but it was heavy, taped down with an IV line running into the crook of my elbow. My head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton wool, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on aluminum foil. "Ah, you're back with us," a voice said. I turned my head slowly. A nurse, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, was adjusting the drip. She offered a small, professional smile. "Water," I croaked. She held a cup with a straw to my lips. I drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing the sandpaper texture of my throat. "What happened?" I asked, my voice gaining a little strength. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion," the nurse said, checking my chart. "Your blood pressure was through the floor. You fainted in the middle of an exam. That's a dramatic exit." "Did I finish?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Did I submit the paper?" "Honey, you were out cold before you hit the floor. The university paramedics brought you in. You've been here for about 6 hours." 6 hours? My hand flew to my side, searching for my pocket, but I was in a hospital gown. My phone, I gasped. I need my phone, my family. They'll be worried sick. If I haven't answered, they'll think I'm dead. The nurse's expression shifted. The professional smile faltered, replaced by a look of pity that made my stomach twist harder than the nausea. "We called them," she said softly. "We found your emergency contact listed in your student file. Sandra, your mother." "Is she here?" I tried to sit up, looking toward the door. "Is she in the waiting room? You have to let her in. She gets panic attacks if she doesn't know we." "Ray, I am. Andrew probably drove her, and he hates hospital parking, so he's probably yelling at the attendant." "Zoe," the nurse interrupted, her hand gently touching my shoulder to steady me. "Nobody is here." I froze. "What?" "We called your mother 3 times," the nurse explained, her voice carefully neutral, though I could hear the judgment seeping through the cracks. "The first time, she didn't answer. The second time, a man answered, your father, maybe? Mason." I nodded dumbly. "He said they were eating dinner and couldn't talk. He told us to just give you some fluids and send you home in an Uber." It felt like I had been slapped. He said that. "The third time," the nurse continued, looking pained, "your brother answered. Andrew. We explained you had collapsed from severe stress and needed to be monitored overnight for potential cardiac irregularities due to exhaustion. And he asked if this meant you wouldn't be home to cook on Sunday." The silence in the hospital room was absolute. The beeping monitor seemed to mock me. "Beep, fool, beep, doormat, beep, servant." "I see," I whispered. I sank back into the pillows, the fight draining out of me faster than the saline was dripping in. "I'm sorry, sweetie," the nurse said, patting my hand. "Some families, well, they show their true colors when the chips are down. You rest now, you need it." She left the room, dimming the lights. I lay there in the semi-darkness, staring at the ceiling tiles. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and stinging. I had worked myself into a hospital bed for them. I had taken on 3 jobs, handled every bill, every appointment, every emotional crisis, every legal hurdle my reckless brother Andrew jumped over. And they couldn't even be bothered to drive 20 minutes to see if I was alive. They were eating dinner. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't pray for strength to help them. I didn't pray for patience. I just felt a cold, hard knot form in the center of my chest. It was heavy, like a stone, but it felt oddly stable. It was the only thing holding me together. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was worse than the exhaustion. It was a clarity so sharp it cut me. The next morning, a different nurse brought me my personal belongings, retrieved from the university lockers by a campus security guard who had stopped by. "Your phone has been blowing up," the morning nurse said cheerfully. "You must be popular." I took the phone. The screen was cracked from a drop months ago, one I couldn't afford to fix because Olivia needed a new dress for a formal, and Mason needed investment capital for a scheme that went nowhere. I unlocked it, my thumb hovering over the notifications. 47 missed calls, 103 unread messages. My heart leaped. Maybe the nurse was wrong. Maybe they were panicked. Maybe they were trying to get into the ward. I opened the family group chat. "Sandra, Mom, where is the Netflix password? It's not working on the TV. Andrew, Zoe usually resets it on the 15th. She probably forgot to pay the bill again. Useless. Olivia, OMG, I need her car tomorrow. Did she leave the keys at the house or take them to her exam? Mason, Dad, someone call her. The internet is slow. Sandra, the hospital called again, so dramatic, she's just sleeping. She always sleeps when she wants to get out of chores." I scrolled down, my breath hitching. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one "we love you." Not one "get well soon." It was a laundry list of demands. A catalog of services I provided that were currently interrupted. Then I saw the notification from Facebook. I rarely checked it, but Andrew had tagged me in a post. I clicked the app. The blue light of the screen illuminated the dark hospital room. There was a photo of our living room. It was messy, pizza boxes on the table, beer bottles on the coasters I had bought. Andrew, Mason, and Olivia were sprawled on the couches, grinning, holding up slices of pizza. The caption read, "Finally got the house to ourselves. No nagging, no stress, just vibes, peace, and quiet at last. Vacation mode family time, no drama." It had been posted 12 hours ago, right around the time the nurse told them I might have cardiac issues. I stared at the photo. I stared at Andrew's smug face. I stared at my mother, Sandra, in the background, laughing at something on the TV I bought, watching the subscription I paid for, in the house I was single-handedly keeping out of foreclosure. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet, like a dry twig stepping on in a winter forest. I looked at the IV in my arm. I looked at the hospital menu on the tray table. I didn't reply to the texts. I didn't comment on the photo. I didn't call them back. I turned my phone off, completely off. For 3 days, I stayed in that hospital bed. The doctors wanted to keep me for observation because my cortisol levels were dangerous, and my heart rhythm was erratic. "I can't afford this," I had told the doctor on the second day. "You have insurance through the university, Zoe," he replied. "And honestly, you can't afford not to be here. If you go back to whatever environment put you in this state, you will have a stroke before you're 30. So I stayed. I slept for 14 hours a day. I ate hospital jello. I watched daytime television. And I thought about the lease renewal. My family lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom rental in a nice suburb. We had been there for 6 years. But because Mason had a bankruptcy on his record and Sandra had never worked a day in her life, the lease wasn't in their names. It was in mine. Every year, around this time, the landlord, Mr. Henderson, would send over the renewal packet. It required a signature and a proof of income update. I usually handled it seamlessly. I'd sign, pay the deposit bump, and file it. They never even saw the paperwork. I knew, because I had checked my email before the exam, that the deadline to renew or vacate was yesterday. But there was something else, something Andrew had forgotten. A month ago, Andrew had gotten into a minor legal scrape, a DUI that resulted in property damage. Because I was a paralegal, I had called in a huge favor with my boss to represent him pro bono, keeping him out of jail on the condition that he attended community service and court dates. I was the point of contact for the law firm. All notices went to me. If I wasn't there to remind him, if I wasn't there to drive him, if I wasn't there to smooth things over with the clerk. I looked at my black screen. "Peace and quiet," I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted peace and quiet, Andrew. I'll give you the silence of the grave." To understand why I didn't just leave years ago, you have to understand how Sandra operates. She doesn't chain you up. She guilts you into building the cage yourself. "We're a team, Zoe," she would say, usually while I was doing the dishes and she was drinking wine. "Your father tries his best, but the world is just so hard on him. And Andrew, he's sensitive, he's an artist. He needs us to protect him." Andrew wasn't an artist. He was 22, unemployed, and ran a YouTube channel with 43 subscribers where he reviewed energy drinks. But to Sandra, he was the second coming of Spielberg. I was the strong one, the capable one, which was code for the one we can dump everything on. I started working at 16. By 20, I was paying the utilities. By 22, when Mason retired early due to stress, he got fired for sleeping on the job, I took over the rent. I got into law school on a full scholarship, but I still worked 30 hours a week just to keep the fridge stocked. And then there was Olivia, 19 years old. She was Andrew's shadow, mimicking his cruelty because it earned her approval from our parents. If Andrew made fun of my cheap clothes I wore so I could buy her the brand names she demanded, Olivia would laugh. If Andrew called me a bore for studying, Olivia would turn up the music. But the real architect was Andrew. He wasn't just lazy, he was malicious. He resented that I was succeeding. He resented that I was the one keeping the roof over his head, even though he'd never admit that's what I was doing. He preferred the narrative that I was a control freak who liked lord it over them. 2 weeks before my exam, Andrew had cornered me in the kitchen. "You need to give me $2,000, he said, not asking but demanding. "I don't have $2,000, Andrew. I need to pay my tuition fees for next semester." "You always have money," he sneered, grabbing an apple from the bowl and taking a bite. "You're just hoarding it. I have a business opportunity. Crypto, it's a sure thing. Mom said you'd give it to me." "Mom can give it to you then." He had stepped closer, looming over me. He was 6'2", and he used his size to intimidate. "Don't be a bitch, Zoe. You think you're better than us because you go to that fancy school? You're nothing. You're just the help." Just the help. That phrase had been rattling in my brain when I walked into the exam hall. Now, lying in the hospital bed on day 4, I realized he was right. I was the help. And what happens when the help quits without notice? The household collapses. My phone, which I had turned on briefly just to check the time, buzzed. A text from Mr. Henderson, the landlord. "Hi, Zoe. I haven't received the signed renewal. The deadline was yesterday. Since I didn't hear from you, the system automatically flagged the unit for listing. I have a showing scheduled for next Monday. Is the place ready?" I stared at the text. If I replied now, I could beg. I could explain I was in the hospital. Mr. Henderson liked me, he would probably reverse it. Then I thought of the pizza. I thought of peace and quiet. I thought of Andrew calling me useless. I didn't reply to Mr. Henderson. I deleted the notification. Then another text came through. This one from the law firm where I worked and where Andrew's pro bono defense was being handled. From Legal Secretary Hey Zoe, just a heads up. Andrew missed his court check in this morning. The judge issued a bench warrant. Since you're the guarantor on his bond, we need to know where he is or they're going to revoke it. We tried calling him, but his voicemail is full. A bench warrant. If I did nothing, the police would go to the house. The house that was currently being listed for rent because the lease wasn't renewed. I felt a strange, calm smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in months. I put the phone back on the bedside table, face down. Let them enjoy their peace and quiet for a few more days. I was discharged on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was shining, a cruel, bright irony considering the storm I was about to unleash. I didn't call an Uber to take me home. I didn't call Andrew to pick me up, not that he would have come. Instead, I called a cab and gave the driver the address of a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. It was cheap. It smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and lemon pledge, and it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen because it was mine. I had $300 in cash in my wallet, emergency money I kept hidden in a hollowed-out textbook on torts. I had grabbed it before the exam, a subconscious instinct that I might need a getaway fund. Once I was inside the room, I locked the deadbolt. I put the chain across. Then I sat on the lumpy mattress and opened my laptop, which the nurse had returned to me along with my clothes. It was time to audit my life. I logged into my bank account. My stomach tightened as the page loaded. I was the primary account holder, but because I was controlling and abusive, according to Sandra, I had been bullied into giving Mason authorized access for emergencies. The balance on the screen made the air leave my lungs. Available balance, $12.43. I stared at the number. Before I went into the hospital, there had been nearly $4,000 in there, savings for my bar exam prep course, rent, and the inevitable emergency fund. I clicked on transaction history. Liquor Barn, $145 PlayStation Network, $69.99 PlayStation Network, $69.99 Uber Eats, $84.50 Sephora, $230 cash withdrawal, ATM Casino, $500 cash withdrawal, ATM Casino, $500. The dates corresponded exactly to the days I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a saline drip. While I was unconscious, worrying about my heart stopping, my family hadn't just ignored me. They had looted me. They saw my incapacity not as a tragedy, but as an open vault. Mason had gone to the casino. Olivia had bought makeup. Andrew had bought video games. They had stripped me to the bone. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it wasn't sadness. It was rage, pure, white-hot, clarifying rage. It burned away the last vestiges of guilt I had about what I was about to do. I picked up my phone. It was still on Do Not Disturb, but I could make outgoing calls. First, I called Mr. Henderson. "Zoe," his voice was warm but concerned. I was worried. I never heard back about the renewal. "I know, Mr. Henderson. I'm so sorry. I've been indisposed." I kept my voice steady, professional. "I'm actually calling to confirm that I will not be renewing the lease." There was a pause. "Oh, that's unfortunate. You've been a great tenant. Does your family know? Mason mentioned when I saw him in the yard that you guys were planning to stay forever." "My family is aware of the situation," I lied smoothly. "In fact, I've already moved out. The rest of them will be vacating by the deadline." "The deadline is Monday, Zoe," he reminded me. "That's 4 days away. If they aren't out, I'll have to file for eviction, and since your name is on the lease." "Actually," I interrupted, "I reviewed our contract. Clause 14b states that if the primary tenant vacates and provides notice of non-renewal, any holdover occupants are treated as trespassers, and the eviction record names them, not the primary tenant, provided I submit an affidavit of surrender." "You really are a law student," he chuckled. "Okay, send me the affidavit, but Zoe, if they're still there on Monday, the sheriff comes, it gets ugly." "I understand," I said. "Do what you have to do." I hung up, step 1 complete, the clock was ticking. Next, I called my boss, Mr. Alcott, the senior partner at the firm. "Zoe," he barked, though his tone was softer than usual. "We heard you collapsed. Are you okay? Do you need more time off?" "I'm recovering, sir. Thank you. But I'm calling about the State v. Andrew Miller case." "Right, the bench warrant. It's a mess, Zoe. The judge is furious. Andrew didn't just miss the check-in. He apparently posted a video of himself king on social media the same night. Since it was a DUI charge, the DA is looking to revoke bond entirely." "I see." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Alcott, I am formally withdrawing as his bond guarantor. I am also resigning as the firm's liaison for his case. I cannot ethically ensure his compliance anymore." "If you withdraw the guarantee, Zoe, we have to notify the court immediately. The police will actively look for him. They'll go to his residence." "I know the law, sir," I said, my voice trembling slightly before hardening. "Please file the motion." "Are you sure he's your brother?" "I don't have a brother, Mr. Alcott. I have a client who refused to follow counsel's advice, and I'm done representing him." I hung up. I sat in the silence of the motel room. I had just rendered them homeless and put a warrant out for Andrew's arrest. I waited. It took 3 more days. I stayed in the motel, eating vending machine crackers and studying for the bar exam on my laptop. I didn't turn my phone's cellular data on. I didn't log into social media. I existed in a bubble of silence. It was bliss. Then, exactly 1 week after my collapse, I decided it was time. I woke up early, showered, and put on the one clean outfit I had, a pair of jeans and a sweater. I made a cup of instant coffee. Then, I turned my phone's network back on. The device vibrated so hard against the wooden table it sounded like a drill. For 5 solid minutes, notifications cascaded down the screen like a digital waterfall. 300+ missed calls, 500+ messages, voicemail full. The tone of the messages shifted dramatically over the timeline. Day 4, Thursday. "Sandra, Zoe, the card got declined at the grocery store. Fix it. Mason, did you move the money to savings? Transfer it back. I need gas." Day 5, Friday. "Andrew, yo, some guy named Henderson came by and put a sign in the yard. Said something about a showing, Call him and tell him to F off. Sandra, Zoe, pick up. Why is there a for rent sign on the lawn? Day 6, Saturday. Olivia, Zoe, the power just went out. Did you pay the bill? Andrew, where are you? The cops came by looking for me. I didn't open the door. They said they have a warrant. You said you fixed this. Day 7 today. Sandra, we are in trouble. Call now. Mason, please pick up. The landlord is here with the police. They say we have to leave tomorrow. Sandra, Zoe. I stared at the screen, sipping my coffee. The panic in the text messages was palpable. They were drowning, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the lifeboat. I was the ocean. My phone rang in my hand. It was Sandra. I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello. Zoe. The scream was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Oh my God, where have you been? Are you insane? Do you have any idea what is happening to us? I've been recovering, I said calmly. Doctor's orders, no stress. No stress, she shrieked. There is a sheriff's deputy in the driveway. Mr. Henderson is saying we have to be out by tomorrow morning or they're going to throw our things on the curb. He says the lease was terminated. Fix it. Tell him it's a mistake. It's not a mistake, Mom. Silence. The line went dead quiet, save for her heavy, ragged breathing. What? She whispered. I didn't renew the lease, I said, enunciating every word. I decided I wanted to move out, and since the lease is in my name and I'm the only one with verified income, I canceled it. You canceled it? Her voice rose to a hysterical pitch. But where are we supposed to go? We have nowhere. Your father is disabled. Andrew is. Andrew is an adult, I cut in. And Dad isn't disabled, Mom. He's lazy. There's a difference. How dare you? This was Mason, grabbing the phone. After everything we've done for you, we put a roof over your head. No, Mason, I corrected him. I put a roof over your head. I've paid every cent of rent for 4 years. I paid for the groceries you're eating right now. I paid for the internet Andrew uses to mock me online. That was a joke, Andrew's voice yelled from the background. It was a joke, you psycho. God, you're so sensitive. Is the warrant a joke too, Andrew? I asked. I heard a scuffle and then Andrew was on the line. You did that, he hissed. The lawyer called. He said you pulled the bond, you ratted me out. I didn't rat you out. You missed court. You violated your probation. I just stopped paying for your mistakes. I saw the bank activity, Andrew. I saw the $500 you withdrew at the casino while I was in the hospital. So what? He spat. It's family money. It was my money, I said. My tuition money, my survival money, you stole from me while I was unconscious. We needed to eat, Sandra wailed in the background. You spent $200 at Sephora, Olivia, I said loud enough for the sister I knew was listening to hear. Did you eat the lipstick? We're coming to find you, Andrew THR. Eatoned, his voice dropping low. I know you're at school or one of your nerd friends' houses. When I find you, you're going to sign that renewal and you're going to fix the warrant. I wouldn't recommend that, I said. I'm not at school, and Andrew, the police are already there for the eviction notice. If you leave the property, they'll likely pull you over. If you stay, they'll execute the warrant when they come to clear the house tomorrow. You're trapped. You bitch, he screamed. You ungrateful, selfish bitch. Peace and quiet, I said. Isn't that what you wanted? You posted it for the world to see. Now you have it. No nagging sister, no controlling daughter. Just you guys and the consequences of your own actions. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of finally saying the words I had swallowed for a decade. But it wasn't over. I knew them. They wouldn't just pack up and leave. They would destroy the house out of spite. They would try to ruin my credit. They would try to steal my identity more than they already had. I needed one last thing. My passport, my birth certificate, and my hard drive with all my law school notes were still in the safe in my bedroom closet. I hadn't been able to grab them when the ambulance took me. If I didn't get them, Andrew would burn them. I knew he would. I looked at the clock. It was 10:00 a.m. They were all at the house, panicking. I needed an escort. I called the non-emergency police line. I need to request a civil standby, I told the dispatcher. I am the leaseholder of a property, and I need to retrieve my legal documents and personal effects. I have reason to believe the occupants, who are being evicted, will become violent. We have a unit in the area, the dispatcher said. Officer Miller. He's actually heading there to serve a warrant on an Andrew. Andrew Miller, I finished. Yes, that's my brother. Meet the officer at the end of the street in 20 minutes. I checked out of the motel. I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to the neighborhood I had spent 6 years supporting. When I arrived, a cruiser was waiting. A tall officer with a buzz cut stepped out. Zoe, he asked. Yes, thank you for helping me. The dispatcher said there's a volatile situation. We're here to pick up the brother on a bench warrant, but if you need to get your stuff, do it fast. These domestic things can go south quick. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same, but the energy was different. The blinds were drawn. The for rent sign Mr. Henderson had placed was ripped out of the ground and thrown in the bushes. I walked up the path, the officer a step behind me. I used my key. The door swung open. The living room was a disaster. Suitcases were open on the floor, clothes thrown everywhere. Sandra was sitting on the couch, sobbing into a tissue. Mason was pacing. Olivia was scrolling on her phone, looking bored but anxious. They looked up as I entered. Zoe, Sandra jumped up, her face lighting up with a desperate, delusional hope. Oh, thank God, you're here. Tell the officer it's a misunderstanding. Tell him you're renewing the lease. She rushed toward me, arms open, as if the last week hadn't happened. As if she hadn't ignored me in the hospital. As if they hadn't stolen my money. I stepped back. I'm not here to renew anything. I'm here for my papers. Sandra froze, the hope on her face curdled into hatred instantly. You wouldn't dare. Where is Andrew? The officer asked, stepping forward. Andrew Miller. He's not here, Mason shouted, stepping between the officer and the hallway. He went out. You can't come in here. We have rights. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I am the leaseholder. I grant you permission to enter, officer. And Andrew is in the basement. It's where he hides when he's scared. Zoe, Mason roared, lunging at me. The officer's hand was on his chest in a second, pushing him back. Sir, sit down, now. I walked past my father. I walked past my mother, who was now screaming obscenities at my back. I walked past Olivia, who just glared at me and muttered, traitor. I went to my room. It had been ransacked. My mattress was overturned. My clothes were pulled out of the drawers. They had been looking for money. But the wall safe was hidden behind a vent cover I had installed myself. They were lazy. They would never unscrew a vent. I used a coin from my pocket to undo the screws. I pulled out the small metal box. Inside was my life, passport, social security card, birth certificate, and the external hard drive with 4 years of law school work. I clutched the box to my chest. As I walked back out to the living room, I heard the commotion. The officer had Andrew in handcuffs. He had dragged him up from the basement. Andrew was shirtless, wearing pajama pants, looking like a terrified child. Zoe, Andrew screamed when he saw. W me, tell him I was sick. Tell him I didn't mean to miss court. Don't let them take me. I stopped. I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had defended, the brother I had paid for, the brother who had wished for peace and quiet while I was hooked to machines. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded stack of papers I had printed at the motel. Officer, I said, while you have him, I'd like to file a report. The room went silent. What is this? The officer asked, looking at the papers. Bank statements, I said, handing them over. Proof of credit card fraud and identity theft. While I was hospitalized and incapacitated, these 4 people used my cards to withdraw over $3,000 and opened 2 credit lines in my name. Sandra gasped. Zoe, no, you can't. That's family business. It's a felony, Mom, I said coldly. Andrew withdrew 500 from an ATM at the casino. Mason charged unauthorized transactions. It's all there. Dates, times, locations. You're arresting my son, Sandra wailed, grabbing the officer's arm. He shook her off sternly. Ma'am, step back. The officer looked at the statements, then at me. You want to press charges against your family. I looked at Mason, whose face was purple with rage. I looked at Sandra, who was looking at me like I was a monster. I looked at Andrew, who was crying now, snot running down his face. They aren't my family, I said. They're just the people who used to live here. I want to press charges, I confirmed, for everything. Zoe, please, Olivia cried out, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. If they get arrested, who is going to take care of me? I looked at my 19-year-old sister, the girl who needed a new dress while I was working 3 jobs. You're an adult, Olivia, I said, walking toward the door. I suggest you get a job. I hear McDonald's is hiring. Wait, Sandra screamed. You can't leave us. We have nowhere to go, the house. I paused at the threshold. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright. The eviction team comes tomorrow at 8:00 a.m., I said without turning back. I'd start packing if I were you, but honestly, I don't care what you do. I walked out. Behind me, I heard the officer reading Andrew his rights. I heard Sandra screaming my name. I got into my Honda. I locked the doors. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. The eviction, I was told later by Mr. Henderson, was a spectacle that the neighbors would be talking about for decades. He called me the afternoon it happened to give me a grim update. Sandra had refused to leave the porch, clinging to the railing like a barnacle, screaming that her daughter was a demonic lawyer who had tricked them. Mason had tried to physically intimidate the sheriff's deputies, a tactic that resulted in him being threatened with a taser. Olivia had simply sat on the curb, live-streaming the entire event on TikTok, crying about how unfair life was, hoping for donations that never came. They were removed, the locks were changed. Their possessions, the ones they hadn't destroyed in a fit of pique the night before, were hauled out to the street. I didn't go to watch, I didn't need to, I was done looking backward. 3 weeks passed. I spent those weeks in a blur of focused energy. I moved into a small, studio apartment near the campus. It was a shoebox compared to the 4-bedroom house I had rented for them, but it was silent. It was clean. And for the first time in my life, every item in the fridge belonged to me. Andrew had been bailaid out by Mason, who had apparently sold his beloved truck, the one he claimed he couldn't work without, to pay the bond. They were staying in a cheap weekly motel on the highway, the kind of place where people went to disappear. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their emails. I focused entirely on the final hurdle of my academic career, graduation. The ceremony was held in the university's grand auditorium, a cavernous hall of mahogany and velvet. I sat in the sea of black robes, the mortarboard heavy and grounding on my head. My name was listed in the program, Zoe Miller, summa cum laude. I had invited no one. My ticket allotment of 4 guests remained unclaimed, a blank space in the system. Or so I thought. As the dean began his speech about integrity and the moral compass of the law, I felt a vibration in my pocket. Then another. Then a rapid-fire buzzing that made my leg numb. I ignored it. I watched the stage. Then I heard a commotion at the back of the hall. The heavy double doors, which were being guarded by student volunteers, were pushed open with force. A hush rippled through the back rows, rolling forward like a wave. Heads turned. Whispers started. "You can't go in there," a volunteer hissed loudly. "She's my daughter. I have a right to see her." My blood ran cold. The voice was Sandra's, but it wasn't the sweet, manipulative voice she used. Ed when she wanted money. It was the shrill, desperate shriek of a woman who had lost control. I refused to turn around. I stared straight ahead at the dean, who had paused his speech, adjusting his glasses and peering into the gloom of the auditorium. Zoe, the scream echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Zoe Miller. The entire graduating class of the law school, 300 future attorneys, turned to look. I had no choice. I stood up and turned. They were a sight. Sandra was wearing a stained tracksuit, her hair wild and unwashed. Mason was limping, leaning on a cane I had never seen before, playing up a frailty he didn't possess. And Andrew? Andrew looked gaunt, his eyes darting around nervously, wearing a hoodie that was far too casual for the setting. Olivia was trailing behind them, looking mortified but compliant. They were marching down the center aisle. Security guards were moving in from the sides, but my family was faster, fueled by the manic energy of the desperate. There she is, Andrew pointed a shaking finger at me, the one who put her own brother in jail. The dean stepped to the microphone. "Excuse me, you need to leave immediately or the police will be called." "Call them," Sandra yelled, stopping 10 rows back from where I stood. She addressed the crowd, throwing her arms wide. "Call the police. She loves the police. She arrested her own brother. She evicted her disabled father. Look at her. She sits there in her fancy robe while her family starves in a motel." The auditorium was deadly silent. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I could feel the eyes of my classmates on me, some confused, some horrified. In their world, family was sacred. They didn't understand the parasitic dynamic I had survived. I could have sat down, I could have let security drag them out, I could have hidden. But I was done hiding. I stepped out of my row. I walked to the center aisle, meeting them halfway. I stood tall, my black robe billowing slightly, looking like the judge I one day hoped to be. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice calm, projected clearly without shouting. "We have nowhere else to go," Mason shouted, brandishing his cane. "You cut us off, you stole the house money, you ruined us." "I didn't steal anything," I said, loud enough for the dean, the professors, and every student to hear. "I stopped giving you my money. There is a difference." "You ungrateful brat." Sandra lunged forward, but Andrew held her back, not to protect me, but because he saw the security guards closing in. "We raised you, we fed you. I have been the sole provider for this family since I was 19 years old," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. "I paid the rent, I paid the bills, I paid for the food." I took a step closer to Andrew. "And when I collapsed from exhaustion last week," I continued, pointing at him, "when I was lying in a hospital bed hooked to an IV because I had worked 3 jobs to support you, you didn't come to see me, you didn't call." I turned to the crowd, addressing my peers. "My brother posted a photo of them eating pizza and celebrating my absence," I told the room. He captioned it, "Peace and quiet at last." A gasp went through the room. The sympathy that Sandra had tried to cultivate evaporated instantly. I turned back to Andrew. "And while I was unconscious, you stole $3,000 from my tuition fund to gamble at a casino." "That's a lie," Andrew screamed, his face turning red. "It's in the police report," I said coldly. "The one that got you arrested, the one that will ensure you have a felony record for fraud." The security guards arrived then, flanking the family. "Zoe, please," Sandra's voice suddenly switched, dropping the anger, shifting into the pathetic whine that had worked on me for years. She reached out a hand. "Baby, please, we're hungry, we're sorry, just drop the charges, sign a new lease. We can be a family again, we love you." It was the final test, the ultimate manipulation, public vulnerability. I looked at her hand, I looked at her eyes. There was no love there, only hunger. Hunger for my resources, hunger for my compliance. "I know you're hungry, Mom," I said softly. Her eyes lit up with hope. "But I'm not your meal ticket anymore," I finished. "I'm your victim, and today I'm your prosecutor." I looked at the head of security. "Please remove these trespassers. I have a restraining order pending, and they are in violation of it." "No, Zoe, no." Sandra began to scream as the guards took hold of them. Mason tried to swing his cane and was promptly tackled. Andrew, cowardly to the end, put his hands up and walked out voluntarily, trying to distance himself from the chaos. Olivia just covered her face and ran. As they were dragged out of the double doors, screaming obscenities, the hall was silent again. I stood there for a moment, shaking. Then, from the stage, the dean sent Arded to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. Then the professors joined in. Then the front row. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, a thunderous ovation that had nothing to do with my grades and everything to do with my spine. I walked back to my seat, tears streaming down my face. But for the first time in 25 years, they weren't tears of exhaustion. They were tears of liberation. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely legal. Because I had pressed charges for identity theft and credit card fraud, the state took over the case. Andrew's defense, that it was family money, fell apart the moment the prosecutor presented the bank logs showing the authorized users versus the unauthorized withdrawals made while I was incapacitated. Andrew pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of felony theft to avoid a 3-year prison sentence. He was given 5 years of probation, mandatory community service, and, crucially, a court order to pay restitution. He owed me $3,000. He would never pay it, of course. He worked under the table now, washing dishes at a dive bar, living in a rooming house. But the money didn't matter. The criminal record did. It was a permanent mark that ensured he could never pull a scam like that on a landlord or a bank again. Mason and Sandra didn't fare much better. Without my income, and with an eviction on their record, no reputable landlord would touch them. They bounced between cheap motels until the money from the truck ran out. Eventually, they moved 2 towns over into a subsidized housing unit that required them to verify their income. Since neither had worked in a decade, Mason was forced to take a job as a greeter at a big box store. Sandra had to clean houses, the ultimate irony for a woman who had treated me like her maid for years. I heard through the grapevine, a mutual acquaintance from the old neighborhood, that they told everyone who would listen that I was dead. Our daughter died, Sandra would apparently tell people, weeping fake tears. She had a heart attack in law school, a tragedy. It was easier for her to kill me off in her fantasy than to admit I had escaped her control. As for me, I passed the bar exam in the top 5% of the state. I accepted a job as an associate at a firm in the city, specializing in family law. My specialty was financial abuse and coercive control. I became the lawyer I wished I had known when I was 20. 6 months after graduation, I was sitting in my new apartment. It was a Friday night. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a velvet sofa, a kitchen stocked with wine and good cheese. My phone sat on the coffee table. It was quiet. No demands for money, no crisis texts, no guilt trips. I walked over to the window and looked out at the lights of the city. I thought about that night in the hospital, the loneliness, the terrifying realization that I was unloved. I remembered Andrew's caption, "Peace and quiet at last." He had meant it as an insult. He had meant that my voice, my nagging, my reminders of reality were a noise he wanted to silence. But he had given me a gift. He had shown me that my absence didn't make their hearts grow fonder, it just made their wallets lighter. He had shown me that my value to them was purely transactional. I took a sip of wine. The silence in my apartment wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of potential. It was full of safety. It was full of a future that belonged entirely to me. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. "You were right, Andrew," I whispered to the city below. "Peace and quiet is wonderful." I turned off the lights, sat on my sofa, and for the first time in my life, I enjoyed the sound of absolutely nothing.